Okay. Thanks everyone for your patience. We were just giving it a couple of minutes for people to log in. Sorry. Okay. Thanks everyone for your patience. We were just leaving it a couple of minutes for people to log in. Paul, can you just check you can hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Just to restate some of the housekeeping here, the event is being recorded and will be made public. We will share the slides as well with everyone who is registered through Eventbrite. You're all muted on entry. If you find that you're not muted, please mute your mic. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A function. You should see that along the top of your Teams window, and we'll do our best to answer questions at the end. Okay, thank you. So we'll get started now. So this is just to let you know who we are. This is the Atlantic Technology University, and we're doing this as well with SEI through the Sustainable Energy Communities Programme. And the webinar today, just in case you're in the wrong one, this is a review of the public consultation on private wires. So just going to let you know a little bit more about the ATU and our team. We're then going to have an overview of the private wires public consultation. We're going to review the consultation points, not all of them because they're extensive. We just wouldn't be able to do that in an hour or even 3 hours. And the final couple of slides just give the advice on how to submit a response if you would like to do that. So I work in the Atlantic Technology University in what we call the Contract Research Unit of the CRU, not to be confused with the Commission for Regulation of Utilities. We're part of the research office, but all of our work is outward facing. We're a dedicated outreach, research, innovation support to enterprises, communities and individuals. So as you can see there, we work with a lot of outside agencies. One of the main ones we work with at the moment is SEAI, and then we recently completed a European project called AgroRes. I mentioned that here because it was working with the agricultural sector and with rural communities. And this private wires legislation, if it comes into effect, should unlock some opportunities in those sectors. So as an overview of the consultation, just to let you know, this consultation is being conducted by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, or DECC. It was published and open for submissions since the 18th of August. And then the submission deadline was to be Friday the 13th, so next Friday, but has been extended to the 27th of October. The link there will take you to the consultation documents on the website, but if you were to web search public consultation private wires, you'll find it. It is part of the Government Climate Action Plan, so this is one of the actions they have to do is to publish this consultation with a view to following it with policy and probably legislation to enact it as well. The public consultation document is 84 pages. There are, I think, 75 questions in there. The document is structured in a chapters with subchapters, and each of those then comes with a list of questions. So when you're submitting a response, the ideal what they would like is for you to answer in relation to the questions they've asked. They do have an open question at the end for anything else that you think of. So as an overview here, private wires could potentially provide an off-grid solution for the generation and supply of electricity in Ireland. As it stands right now, ESB, the Electricity Supply Board, own all of the national electricity grid infrastructure. And the only two organisations that can operate the grid are EirGrid at transmission level or the very high voltage levels, and then ESB networks at the distribution level, which is the medium and lower voltage. So if this comes into existence, if this is permitted for, then private wires would allow private companies, private individuals to install and operate their own privately owned electricity infrastructure, linking generation with demand. So now we're going to go into the consultation points. And as I said, there are extensive. I will refer to all of them, but we're only going to go into some of them in detail. So as I said, there are 75 questions in total. I will list them all, and you'll see the subject they deal with. So if there's something of specific interest to you, when you go to the consultation document, you'll know where to find it. So we're going to look at question 1 in detail, which is just a definition of private wires to get a better understanding of what is meant by that term. We're going to then go to questions 19 to 12, which deal with specific scenarios or opportunities for private wires. And we will also look at question 16, which deals with citizen engagement in private wires legislation. So as I go through this, you'll see the bigger list as well. So the private wires is question 1. We're going to deal with that in a moment, and then the next chapter deals with the national electricity grid. So there are some questions on ESB, on air grid, and contestable connections and direct lines. So we're just going to look at private wires now as question 1. So in the consultation here, they clarify this. It just relates to electricity infrastructure. That's the only type of energy we're dealing with here as such. They would be privately owned, operated, and maintained. In other words, they're outside the control of the ESB or a subsidiary of ESB or airgrid. So they will be privately owned and operated. They can relate to the generation of electricity for self-supply or the generation of electricity for sale or distribution. They won't utilize the national grid, so they will be standalone infrastructure, and they can be at either transmission or distribution level. So if this is legislated for, a private wire operator could build a large transmission grid, or they could build a very small distribution line. There are 2 types of private wire defined within the document. The first is a private line, which is essentially a line linking a single generation site with a single demand user. And the second type then is a private network, which is a network linking multiple sites, multiple generation sites with multiple demand users, or single generation sites with multiple demand users, or multiple generators with single demand users, or any variation of those. So to put it in very simple schematic terms, that's what a private line would look like as a private wire. And you can see that you have a renewable electricity generator there on one end, you have the private line itself, and you have the demand side. So you could potentially have 3 different owners of that. You could have 1 owner of that, or you could have 2 owners of that. And then the private network, very similar in terms of the number of owners, or the potential number of owners, but obviously it's linking more than 1 generation or more than 1 demand site. So the question 1 in the document is actually quite simple. Is there a type of private wire which is not captured by those definitions of private line or private network? That's really it. I couldn't think of one myself, but maybe you can. So we'll move on through the questions, and as you can see there, as I said, we're not going to delve into every one. Question 8 deals with, so the next chapter in there is the potential private wire opportunities, and these are the scenarios, the types of private wires that are envisaged. So we are going to go into some detail here, but I'm not going to deal with question 8, which is private lines for offshore wind energy to green hydrogen production. We are going to look at the next 4 scenarios there. So green hydrogen production from onshore renewable electricity, demand and generation located side by side, demand and generation located some distance from one another, and then private networks for renewable energy business parks. So we are going to look at those now. So the first one, the private line for green hydrogen production from onshore renewable electricity. The points in the consultation document here suggest that this would be a private line from a renewable generator to a hydrogen electrolyzer. So fairly simple concept. It could avoid grid connection costs and could avoid then also use of transmission space on the national grid. It can support hydrogen production at sites that are perhaps remote from the grid or cannot get very much energy from the grid. The potential here for community opportunities and the considerations are that you could have a community-owned renewable electricity generator connected to a green hydrogen plant. and you'd sell all of your electricity directly to that plant rather than trying to sell it through to the grid. In that case, your generator will probably be scaled to the hydrogen plant demand. Now, the hydrogen plant is probably likely to have its own connection, probably will want to operate, on a non-intermittent basis, on a consistent basis, and your renewable energy generator may be wind or solar, so which means it will be variable. But in that scenario, then, if you were just connecting to a hydrogen plant and not trying to connect to the national grid, you could avoid grid connection costs. There will still be a cost to build that private line, whether you take that job on as part of your project or a private wire developer takes it on. There will still be a cost, but you're not trying to interact with the national grid in terms of frequency balancing and things like that, or transformer upgrades. So there could be some avoidance of those costs. There is also potential here that the community acceptance of the hydrogen infrastructure could be improved if the community own one of the energy providers to it. So that's that one. The next question then deals with the private line for demand and generations located side by side. So this is where you have a generator site, let's say a solar farm, directly beside an industry user or a public sector user, and they share a common boundary. So there is no third-party line, no third-party land in between the two sites. It's likely that the demand site will have will maintain a grid connection for security supply and to deal with intermittency. And it would be quite suitable where that full generation capacity from the generator is going to be consumed by the demand site. The new private wire could support the utilization of existing curtailed generation capacity. What that means is if there happens to be a renewable generator operating right now that is often curtailed, often cannot export its electricity to the grid, a private line between it and an adjacent demand site would allow that curtailed electricity to go to the demand site and at least get some value for that. Now, this type of scenario, as I said in the last point here, it's synonymous with what is referred to as direct supply, and that is already happening. So there's an example, fairly well-known example, I think in Cork, with an Eli Lilly plant, where a solar farm was built directly beside it and is wired into the plant, and they share a common boundary, but they're owned. I think maybe they're owned separately, but essentially that scenario is happening. So you might ask, well, why is this in the consultation document? I'd imagine it's here because they would like to bring that type of scenario under the same regulation as the other private wires that they're going to be describing here. So again, for the potential community opportunities here, if a community-owned generator happens to be adjacent to a demand site, you could just wire directly into the demand site and not have to deal with a grid connection. Obviously, for that, you would want that demand site to consume all or most of your electricity. It could support a small scale project. So even if you don't have a very large site, but there is a demand site there that are happy to buy the electricity from you, then this could be a fairly simple project with quite a small wire, essentially. So it would help you avoid those kind of grid connection costs. You would need a contract for sale of electricity, and that would have to be a contract that is suitable to give financial confidence to the project to go ahead. So you will have to consider the longevity of that demand site. Is it going to be there for 20 years or 15 years, or probably at least 20 to make it a worthwhile investment? So some public sector buildings like hospitals, like nursing homes that are likely to be there for a long time could be a good option for this. There are plenty of industry that is likely to be there as well for some time, but it's perhaps more volatile. And this has parallels to the existing type of contract, which is known as solar as a service. So I'd imagine many of you are aware of that type of contract. It would be very similar to that. It's just taking perhaps the solar panels that might be on the roof and putting them in a field that is adjacent to the site. But the contract could be very similar. So now we're moving on to sites that are not adjacent to each other, essentially. So there's some distance between the generator and the demand site. And the private wire would have to cross third-party lands, which could be private or public lands. There could be roads, there could be infrastructure like that as well. Now, the envisaged line distances here we're talking quite broad here. It's from a few kilometers. It could be less. It could be a few hundred meters if it still may have to cross third-party lands, up to a maximum of 100 kilometers. So that would be a considerable investment, and like that's a large project. You're essentially building a grid, a small grid at that stage. You would expect here that the demand site would maintain its own national grid connection, again to supplement supply and for security of supply. But you have the potential here that the generator may be able to export to the national grid through that demand site existing grid connection. So that's an interesting potential as well. If it can be contracted for, it certainly can be done technically, but if a contract can be agreed between those parties. So the potential community opportunities here and considerations are similar to the previous question. The same kind of opportunities exist, but bear in mind that you are crossing third-party lands, so that will add complexity, probably will add cost, but essentially those same kind of opportunities would exist. The private wire costs, while they may be cheaper than a grid connection, they're still not going to be free. So again, longer distances will incur larger costs. Somebody is still going to have to build that connection line, and somebody will have to be responsible for operating it. The next scenario here that we're going to go into is the private network for a renewable energy business park. The consultation document here suggests that this would be a generator or multiple generators supplying clean electricity to demand users in a business park. So, you know, your common industrial business parks with multiple industries would require obviously a network and not just single lines. So the private network operator would have to manage that, but it still could be done. The generators could be co-located or they could be on separate sites. It would expect here that the demand sites again will maintain their own national grid connection to supplement supply and for security supply as well. Okay. So for community opportunities here, again, this is similar to question 10, question 11. If you happen to have a community project site close to a business park, there is potential here for this kind of private wire to facilitate the sale of electricity. The community-owned generator could offer power to the private network owner, and the private network owner could sell that power onto the business, or the community-owned generator could offer that power directly to the business park owner and pay the private wire operator for the use of their network. So those kind of contracts are something that's going to have to be developed through this as well. Again, the private wire costs over long distance will only be feasible if you're into larger scale generators. So that's the let's say 4 scenarios there we just discussed. That I'm only going to go. They're the only ones I'm going to go into in detail. There is another private network here for demand and generation located in different places. It's quite similar to question 12. It's just a little bit different. The next opportunities that are discussed in the document include electric vehicle charging infrastructure and hybrid connections. So again, if you have an interest in those, I'm afraid you're just going to have to go and read that document and delve into them. But we are going to look at question 17, which is the citizen engagement in the renewable energy transition. And there is also then just a reference here for question 18 for on-site generation and consumption, which is often called auto production. So looking at that question 17, the points raised here are not extensive for citizen engagement. It's really a question as part of the public consultation, and it is inviting responses from citizens and from communities. So there's a reminder here that the Climate Action Plan targets a minimum of 500 megawatts of local community-based renewable energy projects by 2030. That's quite a lot, 500 megawatts. We know obviously there's a lot of communities at the moment working towards a 5 megawatt project, but there certainly isn't 100 of them right now. Now that 500 megawatts will also be made up by smaller projects as well, but it's still a considerable target to get to. So private wires could facilitate this, and the question being raised here is how best can private wires facilitate that greater community participation in this. Now, the potential for community opportunities here is simply this point in the legislation. This point in the consultation is for you to propose specific treatment in the private wires legislation, and to examine the question here of how will communities manage the cost of building and maintaining private wires if they are to do that by themselves, or will they simply leave it to private wire operators? So a number of questions were raised in another webinar last night. How this private wires will interact with the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, the Small Scale Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, and the community categories and community channels within those. So that is worth getting clarity on to perhaps suggest how they'll interact, and to ask the question as to how is this going to benefit communities. Now that's the most of the detail we're going to go into. The rest here, I'm just going to show you the other question areas that are in the consultation document. The next chapter after opportunities is regulation. So you can see here that there's a lot of questions around those operators, those new operators and owners, the regulation of the system, safety standards, public safety, the ability to change electricity supplier, more safety, cybersecurity. And then there's a chapter on barriers, and again, much of it there is a little bit of overlap in some of these, but there's a lot of questions raised in there. It may be of interest to some people here. So you have security of supply, you have the national electricity grid network charges, how it will interact with that, efficient development of the grid, how private wire projects might ultimately be subsumed into the national grid, carbon budgets, the Energy Efficiency Directive, plan-led approaches, dial before you dig, which addresses construction safety as well, the electricity sector and the targets for it, and then a very broad questions on the benefit to the state and society. Not the final chapter, but the next chapter is public acceptance. Again, as communities, you may have some interest in this as well. So the acceptance of the national grid infrastructure itself, the connected renewable projects, access to property and land, and private property and land. Those two sub-chapters are worth looking at as well. It asks very, I suppose, quite informative questions around how that may be managed and what challenges there may be in that. There is another one then on public roadways and public lands. And then the conclusion chapter is some changes to the national electricity system and grid. And then the final question is that kind of open-ended question that if you feel you want to submit a response that is not related to the questions asked, you can submit that here. So if you are going to submit a response, as I said, the deadline is the 27th of October. You can submit the response by email to privatewires@decc.gov.ie or by post to the address shown there. The responses from interested parties are welcome and they will be considered. Now, the department does not intend to respond to individual submissions, so you're not going to get an individual response, but a response document will be published. Something to note here is that the department will publish the contents of all submissions. If they'll redact personal data prior to publication, but if there's something specifically in your response that you want to remain hidden or redacted, then the best thing to do is to inform them of that in your submission. So that is all of the presentation, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So I'll just stop sharing and we'll go to the questions. Right. How do we do for questions, Paul? No new questions. Okay.
We have one question there from Eugene.
Okay.
Let me just get it up here.
I can read it, Paul, if you want.
Perfect, Ken. I'm just trying to find it there.
Yeah, so it's from Eugene. It says, Mel, is the private wires concept in existence in other European countries? And if yes, do you know what is the success?
I don't have that off the top of my head now, because I'm getting mixed up now between my consultations, because I know there were European examples in the other one we did, the proximity. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the document. Are there any other questions here before while I look for something on that?
Not yet, Mel. Not yet. I know a few people have emailed there about getting access, and they might have joined slightly late. So tomorrow we'll get this out on the YouTube channel, and anyone who has joined, we will email you a link so you can watch it back.
Okay. I can't see readily any examples in the consultation document referring to let's say other country examples. I don't know enough to try and answer that question without seeing it there. I think if legislated for, this essentially will become a marketplace then for private grid builders and operators, and the scales can be anything from that small line crossing a road, from a solar array to a hotel, up to a dedicated network connecting 3 wind farms to a bunch of business parks. So that's the kind of operator I would see developing out of this, or using this legislation to go into business, and then they could offer that service to community energy projects. So no other questions?
No other questions. We have a comment there. It was much easier to view it on Zoom last night. Last night's event, I think, was on WebEx.
It was on WebEx, yeah.
Paul, there's a question with that comment just above it.
Is there?
Okay. How long will it take private wires legislation to come into being? Again, I don't know that. The consultation will close at the end of the month. There will be, I suppose, policy design on the back of that. The question around whether it needs to be legislated for is essentially, if private wires are going to come into effect, then it will have to be legislated for. So I'm not sure how long that would take. I couldn't answer that. We don't have anyone from the department or a minister here to try and answer that. Okay, we have some more coming in now. So someone has said they didn't understand one point. So for small distribution scale, is there the possibility to sell extra electricity produced by a community? Considering that there would be no connection to the main grid, I would like clarification on this if possible. Okay, for small distribution scale, yes, I'd see. Essentially, the reason this is being done, and we're talking about legislation, is that, you know, I could go and build. There's a green here in the centre of our estate. We could get the resident association together and build a small little solar farm in there. But we could not distribute that electricity across the road to the houses. So if this legislation comes into effect, into effect, then we could, as long as we build to whatever regulations are in place. But we could legally do that and own that line. So small scale will absolutely be possible. And I'd see that's where a lot of the opportunities will arise in the early stage. So in that way, perhaps if you have perhaps a community building that you have covered in solar panels, or you've put a small wind turbine at the back, and it's producing electricity primarily for your own consumption, and you have excess, you could have a wire that, rather than exporting to the grid, goes to your neighbour, if they're using electricity when you're not. So yeah, I would see that as being facilitated by this kind of private wire entity. Yeah. Okay, there's another question here. Could this be used to connect to national grid for the purpose of exporting power to the grid? No, the clarification was there. This will not interact with the national grid. So if you want a grid connection to the national grid, you're still going to have to make an application to EirGrid or ESB networks, and then they're going to give you an offer to build and to build that grid connection. So I would say no in this case. And bear in mind, this is my interpretation of the document, and I'm not a grid expert. I'm not an electrician. I'm a mechanic. Is there more? Oh, there is more. Okay, that's okay. Okay, there's another question here. Is there a question about profiting from communities? The energy generation is very restricted. Individual shareholders are very restricted in what return they can get from their investment, which would put off a lot of people investing in energy generation or private wires. If I'm getting your question correct, is there a question about profiting from communities? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the question. Anyone building anything will want to make a profit from it, even a community. For the definition of renewable energy communities is that the generator is not their primary business, and that the profits made from that are essentially a benefit to the community, even if that's through share returns. So I'm not entirely sure what you're asking by that. The energy generation is very restricted. I'm sorry, I don't quite know what that question means. If you want to try and retype something there or clarify that, take it. There's another question here then. Thank you for this. You're welcome. Apart from the consultation document, is there anywhere we can find out more? The consultation document is extensive. There's a lot in there, so that's 84 pages long. You know, I wouldn't attempt to read it all, but perhaps choose some of those sections that are of interest. The website in which the consultation, you'll find the consultation document, the DECC website, has a little bit of summary information as well. As the first question from Eugene did ask about, is this being done in European countries? So it would be worth, or in any other countries, it would be worth looking at that. There are certainly private line operators in other countries. I just can't think of any specific examples, but I'd imagine they cover some of the opportunities that have been described here. Okay, we have another one here. I'm interested in how California is adjusting to Tesla Energy's virtual power plants. Houses and businesses within the community that have PVs and other generation systems and feed their surplus back to the grid during peak times and get paid for it. My question is, would the line from an individual's Tesla Powerwall or similar to the grid be considered a private line? It depends on where it goes. So if it's just from your Powerwall in your house or in your business to your meter and it's going out through your existing connection, then that's the scenario already. So it's not, it's just connecting with your building's electrical network and exported to the grid. If it were crossing a boundary or crossing third-party land. If you needed to get to the grid in that scenario, then it would be a private line. But I don't think that would be happening. Another one here. Individual shareholders are not allowed to make profit. 100% of the profit must go to the community. So I think that's a point around the renewable energy communities. So thank you for that. Okay. And Paul has put up the link to the consultation itself. Thanks, Paul. Okay. We have another question then. Other services, e.g. water supply, have enormous public liability insurance, leaving only the big companies in the game. Any clarification in this document? I don't think there is, but it's a good point. I'll just double check if there's anything in there on that. There's references here to appropriate levels of insurance being in place. So likely it is worth saying here that it is very likely that any private wire, while it might be owned and operated by an entity other than ESB Networks or EirGrid, it will be regulated to the same standards. So whatever levels of insurance those organizations have for that infrastructure is likely to be required here. So yeah, that will be a consideration, which in a lot of cases may make it far too onerous for a community to own that grid, but for private operators to facilitate a private wire so that a community can sell its electricity perhaps easier than it could by connecting to the national grid. I think that opportunity will arise. Okay, another one. I just think this is so potentially important that it would be great to be able to tell people of a certain age, in brackets, grandparents, who care about the future, that there is someone they can talk to about it. Okay. If there's someone in particular, they can talk to me. But as I said, I'm not an expert on this at all. If they're interested in the information, there's a lot of information to look at. It is all public. We have another one here. The private wires is a great idea, but for communities, the private wires is a great idea, but for communities, it's important that individual shareholders are allowed to get a decent return, as well as the benefit that the community may get from cheaper electricity or funding for local community projects. Okay, there is another consultation open at the moment, which is by the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, which deals with the term proximity in relation to the definition of a renewable energy community. So we did a webinar on that last night. That will be available from SAAI. Now, in that documentation, there is a reference to, in quotes, energy sharing. So that is that scenario whereby communities that have renewable electricity generators in their community can sell directly to their community. Right now, the CRU, the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, are working on the policy around that, and they do intend to facilitate that. And I don't believe I'm speaking out of turn. I think pretty much confirmed that last night. So we should see a framework of how that's going to look sometime next year. Excuse me. Okay, someone said keep going and bless you. Thank you. We'll keep going. Right, we have another question here. Is this similar to the deregulation of the electricity market? So the supply side has more competition now. So now there will be more competition in the network side. Yes, there will be more competition in the network side. This is going to open up to private companies starting to build these, and hopefully we will see competition, which obviously will hopefully improve the overall cost. But I don't see them as competing with the national grid connections. So national grid connections are still going to come under the remit of ESB Networks or EirGrid. That's my understanding of how it's presented here. Okay. Have I missed any there, Paul, that you can see?
No, Mel, I don't think so. That seems to be everything.
Okay, I'm sorry for the ones that I perhaps didn't answer correctly. And yeah, there's 29 attendees. We may have been able to do this with open mic, but we thought there may be more people, in which case the Q&A function works better. Okay. Okay, if that's all right, we will close it off there. As Paul said, we'll put this video on our YouTube channel, hopefully tomorrow, but we will tomorrow email everyone who registered with the slides, which has the link then to the consultation document if you want to look in any further. Even if you don't submit a response to this, the consultation document is quite informative of what private wires are going to look like. Okay, thank you everybody. If that's okay, then we'll leave it there. Good night, everybody.